Right, hi guys, it's HopelessDave here, basically doing a bit of behind the scenes animation tweaking. Thought I'd make a short recording, you guys can have a look and see how we go about animating the animal models really. Got a bunch of the animations on the pig pretty much done already. We've had a bit of a discussion amongst ourselves and decided we want to add just one or two more or make a few tweaks. So I thought I'll do a bit of a few changes here and just record the process, and if anyone's interested in having a look, you can see how we go about doing it. So let's see. One of the things we decided to do was one of the idle animations is a bit sort of boring and it's not very organic, and we've got a few other idle animations we're going to use, so we thought we'll change this one up completely. So I thought what I'll do is I'll just record the process of just doing a new animation. So let's see, I'm going to take, you can see the rig here, how it all works. Basically, for those of you that don't know, each of these points here, they're just bones and different parts of the model are rigged to different bones. So take a look here. Basically, all these parts here, they're all attached to the head bone here. So where the head bone goes, these bits go. And then the bones are obviously attached to each other. So when this one moves, it drives the others that are attached to it. And the only fancy part of the rig really are the inverse kinematic bones here. You pull this bone and it drags all of drags the foot and the four-legged bone with it, and the thigh bone as well. And then you can just orientate the knees with this one here. So it sort of speeds up the process. But we're going to do away with this animation, so I'm going to get all the keyframes down here, get rid of them, and make sure everything is reset. Basically, I've got the auto keying on down here. We're using Blender, by the way, if people were curious. And yeah, if I make a change, so if I go to keyframe 10 and I say right, the leg's going up here, it'll automatically change that, and then it'll move between them as you move the timeline along. I'm going to create one that's animation's 40 frames per second, and I can tweak the FPS to make it speed up or slow down if that's what we want, as long as we don't do it but too drastically, because then it'll look like you're just taking a walking animation or something and speeding up, and that never really looks too good. But 40 frames per second seems to be a good amount for like the odd idle animation. Right, sort of thinking of like doing a head tilt. It's like pig standing still, it's listening to noises in the forest. So let's see. It's a bit bigger. I think what I'll do is I'll just go sort of the halfway mark and just do something. Sort of put on these widgets so you could sort of you could drag the bones around on the axes, or you can just sort of pull the bone around if you want to do it that way. Right. Let's see. Sort of tilting the head up a little bit to the side. Probably want to move the body just a bit as well. So try and get it to look organic. Just blocking out some basic ideas. You can add detail to it later. Just getting like base movements. Looks about right. Something like that. And just duplicate that and put that back at the end so it goes back to its resting position. I want it to hold hold the pose with his head for a bit. So let's duplicate those keyframes here. Basically a keyframe, again, for those that don't know, it's for each frame. If I was to move it, or I said insert a keyframe, I can do like location, rotation of the bones, a few various sort of variables, and then it locks the position that bone is in at that keyframe, and then obviously it sort of it fills the gaps between each keyframe, and it'll automatically move the bones from one to the others in like a smooth motion. You can change that for how it reacts moving between the keyframes, but for the most part, I tend to keep it on the standard default, unless I'm doing something a bit different. Yeah, so I want it to hold that pose there, but I don't want it to be just completely still. So what I'll probably do in the middle is just add touch of movement. There we go. And what I'll also do is just make sure that the body position is the same at the end as it is in the beginning. That way it doesn't jerk back. Yeah, so it's a nice cycling animation. Again, I can sort of like lower the frames a little bit, just or the speed animation just a bit, so it's not quite so fast. You can change that to suit what you want, but you don't want it to be too jerky, because that won't look it won't look good if it's like if a model's jerking around a lot. So try and keep it smooth, especially when it's like something organic, like a pig or any other sort of animal creature you might be doing. There we go. Probably want to do a bit more with the legs. Let's see. Might just raise that leg a little bit. Have it. That sort of takes us like a step in the air or something like that. Just something to add a bit more, something a bit more interesting. And obviously, to return it to its default position at the end, so that it doesn't snatch back. Same with the knee bone. That also needs to go back to its default position. Yeah. And then from here, you can basically you can make all like you've got the base animation done. So you sort of say, well, it's tilting its head a bit too quickly. It's too drastic a movement in too short a period of time or something. So you can go in and now start tweaking it to make it look a bit more natural, a bit more fluid. It's good. I tend just to get the like the base sort of positions in. I know one of the things you can do, you can go in and change the modes between keyframes to something called constant. So what it'll do is it'll just jump between. So if I did this now, all the bones and change the. Well, I'm going to butcher that. The interpolation mode, I think, to constant, and then you'll see what it does is it doesn't like have any smooth transition between the keyframes. It just sort of jumps from one to the other, and this is pretty good for blocking out animations if you want it to be in a particular animation, like the halfway point, at the start, at the end, and you can just see how it will look, just pretty much just in the pose without it moving between them. So that's quite useful for that, because these are pretty simple models. I tend to find that I don't need to worry too much about this. I just leave it on Bezier, and that just does is it smooths it out. So, let's see where we're at. I think what I'm going to do is change the head movement just a little bit so it's not quite so... it's a more subtle movement. It moves a bit too much in the time frame, and it sort of pulls the head up and then kind of just goes back down again. And I feel like if it starts tilting a bit sooner, and does a slightly less drastic movement, so it's a bit more subtle, what that should do is it'll give us a bit more time to hold the pose how we want it in. Let's go something like this. Actually, that's kind of actually not too bad looking. Just like that. It's a bit. It's kind of an interesting. It's kind of sort of tilts pretty quick, and then it's that long, drawn out, sort of listening. Actually, I kind of like that. Actually, that we might actually stick with that for now. Let's see what else I can change. I mean, these are only idle animations, so we don't have to go too crazy with it. But only been like 10 minutes. It's not like it's too time consuming to do this. They're pretty simple models, so they're easy enough to sort of manipulate and pose. The biggest thing with them is trying to get sort of like organic sort of life into them, to make them sort of bounce and flow and feel like a living thing rather than just like a static object that you're just manipulating and sort of clinically. It's you want to try and get some interesting and unique movements in there because it makes them stand out as individual sort of creatures. Especially if you want to make all the different animals behave differently, you don't want them all to just sort of follow the same sort of standards of how they move. So add a bit of uniqueness to each one. And I've tried to make the pig a bit sort of energetic and bouncy in its movements in some of the other animations, so I'm going to try and do that here as well. You actually spend a lot of time when you're animating just playing the animation back and forth, just thinking, what can I change? What doesn't quite look right? Thinking I want to do a bit more with some of the other legs. What I might do is drag the back down a little bit. This adds sort of little subtle movements that just makes it look a bit more like a living object, because it's not something where only the head will move and the rest of the body will just stay perfectly still. Although to be fair, quite a lot of animals do actually do that. You'll see the head tilt and they'll listen out and they won't move, but it's kind of it's more interesting if they're in motion. Something like that. One of the other things I'm going to do is I tend to do this sort of modifier you can add, which just adds a bit of constant, basically noise movement. You could do it to individual bones. And over here we've got something called the graph editor. and this allows you to make more subtle changes to how the bones behave, how they transition between the keyframes. For stuff like this, I don't tend to do much in here. This is usually just I do it all with just manually. But one of the things you can do is if I find there we go. So if I want the body to sort of like jerk up and down a bit as it's doing the animation, what I want to do here is you can move it on different locations. And if I add a modifier, set to noise, what you'll notice is it adds this like crazy jerking looking animation, which obviously looks absolutely awful. But what you can do is you can change the frequency and you can change the strength, and what you can end up with is a really subtle sort of. It's almost like you can use it to animate sort of like the animal breathing or just making tiny little movements here and there without having to animate it all. It'll just do it. It'll do it automatically. The only thing you've got to make sure you do is you need to line up the curves for when it starts and when it ends. Otherwise, you'll have jerky movements. Basically, to show you what that means here, like on this section. At the beginning of the animation, the curve is going down, so basically the bone is going down towards the ground, and at the other end you can see it's also moving back down towards the ground, which means that they'll line up when it's when you go from the start to the end, it'll the position of the bones will line back up, and it'll be, you won't get any jerky movements. But if I changed it so that the bone was rising at the end, falling at the beginning, if that makes sense, it's pretty subtle, so you don't really notice it. But if it was a more drastic movement, it would snatch back. You'd see it. So what I'll do is I'll just keep this at 20. Which seems like a probably good number there. It adds. It's very subtle, but I don't know how easy you can see it from here. But it does add a bit of movement to the body that I haven't animated in. It's just sort of automatically assigned, and it just bobs the body a little bit just to give it a bit more life. And you can go through and you can do stuff like this to any of the bones you want. You can add it to the feet so they move the left and right, rotate a little bit, and it just saves you having to add more keyframes and make manual changes. And then I can just delete this noise modifier off of here if I don't like it. If I decide actually I don't like the change it makes, I don't like how it looks. I haven't done any permanent changes. I just hit that little button up there and it's gone. And I try something else. So it's pretty non-destructive with as a sort of as a workflow. You can you can sort of add that in, and you don't have to worry about thinking, oh, I don't like it now. I've got to change it all. I can just get rid of it, and it adds a bit more life to the models, I find. And to be fair, that's not too bad. That's I think that's perfectly usable. Slow it down a little bit so it just lasts a little bit longer. And yeah, that's just another animation we can just add to the list. So when it's stood still somewhere, it's not just stood there like a statue not doing anything. It's always good to have a bunch of different idle animations for all the creatures. So yeah, hopefully that's sort of been interesting to see how it works, how it looks behind the scenes. But that's pretty much what I'm doing at the moment. Just going through all the creatures and basically bringing them to life, for want of a better term. This one's the board's pretty much done. It's got most of the animations in here now, so. Sort of bouncing around. Yeah, I'll probably do a few more of these, just so you guys can sort of see how the progress is coming. I've always find it interesting to see what's going on behind the scenes, so hopefully you guys do as well. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.